Okay, so you want to buy a penthouse. Get to the top of the best building in the city, put your name on the highest deed in the stack, and own the one apartment nobody can ever build above. That's the picture. Glass on 3 exposures, a terrace where the wind is the only neighbor, a private elevator that opens into your foyer instead of a hallway. You come home, the doorman knows your name, the city arranges itself below you like a model, and the whole thing appreciates quietly in the background because nobody is making any more top floors. Here's the strange part. In most towers, the penthouse is the worst performing apartment in the building. Not the most volatile, not the riskiest, the worst. The units 20 floors below it, smaller, darker, cheaper, with worse views, beat it on the way in, on the way through, and on the way out. And the people who build these buildings know that before the first shovel goes into the ground, they design around it. Let's start with what you think you're buying. You think you're buying the top of a building. You're buying a volume of air. Read the deed on a condominium unit sometime and notice what it actually describes. A space bounded by the unfinished inner surfaces of the walls, floor, and ceiling. Everything structural is somebody else's. The slab under your feet, the columns holding you up, the curtain wall you paid a premium to look through, the roof directly above your bedroom. None of it is yours. It belongs to a corporation. You own a percentage of that corporation, and you own the paint. That percentage is the single most important number in your entire purchase, and almost nobody reads it before closing. When the building was declared, the sponsor filed a document that assigns every unit a percentage of common interest, usually driven by square footage and original offering price. Your penthouse is 4,200 square feet in a building with 200,000 square feet of residential space. So your percentage lands somewhere around 2.1%. That number determines your share of every dollar the building ever spends forever. It is written into the declaration. You cannot negotiate it, you cannot appeal it, and changing it typically requires a supermajority of the very neighbors who benefit from leaving it alone. You have the largest bill in the building and roughly 2% of the vote. Now, the entry price. Let's say the penthouse is asking $9.2 million. The building's good units, the 2 bedrooms on floor 30, trade around $1,450 a square foot. Your penthouse is priced at $2,190. That's a 51% premium per square foot for the same concrete, the same elevators, the same doorman, the same boiler. You're paying for altitude, terrace, and exclusivity. Here's the problem with paying a premium for exclusivity. Exclusivity means there is exactly one of them, which means there is no comparable sale. Every other unit in that building has 30 siblings that have traded in the last 4 years, so an appraiser can price them in an afternoon. Yours has none. When your buyer's lender orders an appraisal, the appraiser has to reach for a penthouse in a different building, in a different neighborhood, with a different terrace from a different year, and then make adjustments that are essentially opinions. Appraisals on trophy units come in low constantly, not because appraisers are hostile, but because the method requires comparables and you deliberately bought the thing that has none. Then there's the tax you pay for the privilege of signing. In New York, the state mansion tax runs on a progressive schedule that starts at 1% over $1 million and climbs toward 3.9% at the very top. On $9.2 million, the buyer writes a check for roughly $230,000 in mansion tax at closing. That's not a fee for a service. That's not a deposit. That's $250,000 that leaves and never comes back, on top of legal, title, and financing costs. Before you have unpacked a box, you are down about 3%, and the clock on carrying costs has started. Let's talk about the carry, because this is where the penthouse quietly separates itself from every other apartment in the building. Common charges in a full-service luxury tower run somewhere between $2.50 and $3.50 per square foot per month. Call it $3.10. On 4,200 square feet, that's about $13,000 a month, $156,000 a year. Property taxes on a unit at that price level in a major city, after abatements, come to another $5,800 a month, roughly $70,000 a year. Add your own insurance, utilities on a space with 4 exposures and a lot of glass, and the people who look after it, and you're at roughly $250,000 a year to own an apartment you have already paid cash for. That's $21,000 a month to hold an empty box. And common charges do not stay still. They escalate with labor contracts, insurance renewals, and energy, which means the honest planning number over 10 years isn't $2.5 million. With normal escalation, it's closer to $2.9 million. On a $9.2 million purchase, you will spend roughly a third of the purchase price on carrying costs over a decade without a single improvement, a single repair inside your own walls, or a single dollar of debt service. Inside that number, there's a line growing faster than everything else, and it's the one owners argue about at every annual meeting: insurance. The building carries a master policy on the structure. You carry a separate walls-in policy on your own apartment. Between 2021 and 2024, master policy premiums on large residential towers in coastal markets rose by half. And in Florida, many buildings saw them double or triple, driven by reinsurance pricing that has nothing to do with your building's claims history. That premium is a line in the common charges, so your 2.1% share of it rises with it automatically, whether or not you ever file a claim, whether or not the building has ever had one. Then there's the gap between the two policies, and the penthouse sits directly in it. The master policy covers the structure. Your policy covers the interior. Water that comes through a roof or a curtain wall is a structural failure that damages an interior, which means every leak at the top of a building begins as a coverage argument between 2 insurers and a board, and the person living under the wet ceiling is the one who waits. Everything above you is roof. Every drop of water that gets into that building lands in your apartment first. That sets the hurdle. For the penthouse to break even after 10 years, it has to appreciate about 2.9% a year just to cover carry. Add the round trip: broker commission, transfer tax, legal, and you're giving up another 7% at the exit. The real hurdle is closer to 3.7% a year, compounding for a decade before you have made $1. Meanwhile, the 2-bedroom on floor 30 has the same market tailwind and 1/5 of the drag. Now, here's the other side of the ledger, and it's the part the listing photos are actually selling you: the terrace. The terrace is the reason penthouses cost what they cost. Outdoor space at height is genuinely scarce, and buyers pay for it in a way that looks irrational until you're standing on one at sunset. It's also, structurally and legally, the most expensive square footage you will ever acquire. In almost every condominium, the terrace is not yours the way your kitchen is yours. It's a limited common element. You have exclusive use of it. The building owns it. That distinction sounds like paperwork until you understand what's under the pavers. Under your terrace is a waterproofing membrane. It is the roof of the apartment below you, and it is a common element the board is responsible for maintaining. That membrane has a service life of roughly 20 to 25 years. When it reaches the end of that life, the building has to replace it, and to replace it, everything sitting on top of it has to come off. Your pavers, your planters, full of soil that took a crane to fill, your outdoor kitchen with its gas line and its refrigeration, your pergola, your irrigation, your lighting. You paid for all of that. It's your property, not the building's. So the building pays to replace the membrane, and you pay to remove and reinstall everything sitting on it. On a serious terrace, that removal and reinstallation number runs $150,000 to $400,000, and the terrace is unusable for a season while it happens. That's not a disaster. That's the schedule. It's coming, it was always coming, and it arrives roughly once every 20 years for as long as the building stands. The restrictions come with it. Most terrace rights come attached to rules on planting depth, permanent structures, drainage, noise hours, and load. Anything heavy needs structural sign-off because you are proposing to add weight to a slab that was engineered for a specific number. In New York, buildings now run a parapet inspection cycle on top of the facade cycle, which means the low wall between you and a 60-story drop is on somebody's list. And when it fails inspection, your terrace becomes a construction site. And then there's the facade itself. Every 5 years, buildings above 6 stories in New York get inspected under the facade safety program that most people know by its old name, Local Law 11. The inspection is cheap, the repairs are not. A serious facade cycle on a large tower runs $8 to $15 million, and it is not optional and it is not deferrable, because a failed filing carries penalties and liability that no board will accept. Your share of a $12 million facade project at 2.1% is $252,000, and you get something extra that nobody below floor 40 gets. To repair a facade, contractors hang a swing stage, a suspended platform, from the roof. The roof is your roof, which means the rigging is anchored above your ceiling. The platform passes your windows first, and workers spend 18 months at eye level with your bedroom. You also get the sidewalk shed at the base, which is uglier for the retail tenant than for you, and you get the noise, which starts at 7 in the morning because that's when the permit says it can. This is where the first real trap opens, and it has nothing to do with construction. You are a minority shareholder in a corporation you cannot control, whose largest liabilities are invisible until they aren't. Every condominium has a reserve fund. Every condominium has a reserve study, or should. That projects the remaining life of every major system. Roof, facade, elevators, boilers, cooling towers, plumbing risers, garage slab, and calculates what the building should be putting away every month to pay for them. And for 40 years, across the entire American condominium market, boards systematically underfunded that number, because underfunding it keeps monthly charges low, and low monthly charges keep resale prices high, and every owner on that board is also a seller in waiting. The result is a market where the building's real cost was always deferred onto whoever happened to own the unit when the bill arrived. Then, June of 2021 happened in Surfside, Florida, and the arithmetic changed permanently. Before the collapse of Champlain Towers South, that board had approved a roughly $15 million assessment for structural repairs. The per-unit amounts ran from about $80,000 for the small units to over $330,000 for the penthouses. That distribution is the whole lesson in one line. The percentage of common interest that made you the most important owner in the building on the way in makes you the largest payer on the way through. Nobody assesses by usage. Nobody assesses by fairness. They assess by the number in the declaration. After that, Florida passed structural inspection legislation requiring milestone inspections at 30 years, 25 near the coast, and structural integrity reserve studies, and it removed the ability of boards to vote to waive reserve funding. Buildings that had been quietly deferring for decades got handed the true number all at once. Assessments in the tens of thousands per unit became routine. Six-figure assessments stopped being remarkable, and the effect on prices was not evenly distributed. It landed hardest exactly where the percentages were largest. Here's the part that turns a bill into a liquidity problem. After Surfside, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac started requiring detailed questionnaires about structural condition, deferred maintenance and reserve funding before they would buy a loan secured by a unit in a condominium. Buildings that failed went onto an unavailable list. By 2024, that list ran into the thousands of buildings nationally, heavily concentrated in Florida, but present everywhere. Now think about what that does to your penthouse specifically. You bought with cash or with a jumbo loan from a portfolio lender who never intended to sell it to an agency, so the list doesn't touch your financing directly. It touches everything underneath you. The 2 bedrooms on floor 30, the units that create the comparable sales that establish your building's price level, suddenly cannot be bought by anyone who needs a conventional mortgage. That's most of their buyer pool. Those units stop trading or trade only to cash buyers at a discount, and every one of those discounted sales becomes a data point in the file an appraiser opens when your buyer applies for a loan. Your $9.2 million apartment is now priced off a series of distressed sales you had no part in, caused by a condition report on a building you individually cannot fix. You own the most expensive unit in the building and the least control over what the building is worth. So far, the penthouse sounds like an apartment with an unusually large maintenance bill. It's more specific than that. At real height, the physics change and the physics carry a price. Tall buildings move. That's by design. A super tall is engineered to sway within tolerance rather than resist wind rigidly, and the sway is managed with dampers. Within tolerance is an engineering term, not a comfort term. At the top of the building, the amplitude is at its maximum, which means you experience every characteristic of the design at its strongest. The creaking as materials load and unload, the whistle through elevator shafts, the pressure differentials that pull doors shut on their own. Elevators are the specific problem. High-speed elevators in a tall tower are engineered to shut down in high wind conditions, and when they do, the top of the building is the part that becomes unreachable. There are no practical stairs at floor 60. At 432 Park Avenue in Manhattan, one of the most expensive residential addresses ever built, the condominium board sued the developers in 2021 over more than 1,500 alleged construction and design defects, including elevator failures that trapped residents, water damage from failed piping, and noise and movement in wind. Owners in that building had paid tens of millions of dollars each. In San Francisco, Millennium Tower sank and tilted enough to trigger a retrofit project and years of litigation, with a settlement in the hundreds of millions and a permanent stain on the address. Owners paid twice, once in assessments and legal exposure, and again in the value of a building whose name became a punchline. The general rule is this: the higher and newer and more architecturally ambitious the tower, the more of its engineering has never been operated for 30 years by anyone, anywhere. You are not buying proven infrastructure. You are buying a prototype, and you're buying the unit at the extreme end of it, where every tolerance is at its limit. Now here's the trap almost nobody sees coming, and it's the one that actually destroys penthouse value. You did not buy the view. There is no such thing as buying the view. In most of the United States, a landowner has no legal right to light, air, or a view over adjoining property. The controlling logic comes out of a Florida case from 1959, Fontainebleau Hotel Corporation versus 4525 Incorporated, where one hotel built an addition that threw a shadow across its neighbor's pool. The neighbor sued. The court held that a landowner has no legal right to the free flow of light and air across adjoining land, and that a structure serving a useful purpose doesn't become illegal because it blocks somebody else's sunshine. That case is why your view is not an asset. It's a temporary condition of the neighborhood. Look at what you actually paid for. Roughly half the premium over the building's average price per square foot is attributable to sightlines, water, park, skyline, whatever the marketing brochure named. That's a meaningful share of $9.2 million. And it sits entirely on the development rights of parcels you do not own, held by people who are under no obligation to tell you what they plan. If the lot across the street is zoned for a tower and the owner builds one as of right, no hearing is required, no variance is required, and no notice to you is required. You will learn about it from scaffolding. The day that the building tops out, a large fraction of your premium is deleted permanently with no compensation and no cause of action. There is a market solution, and its existence proves the point. In New York, unused development rights can be transferred between adjacent lots. Buildings buy their neighbors' air rights specifically to prevent this, to make sure nothing rises next door. Which means view protection is a thing you can purchase at market price from the person who could otherwise take it from you. If protecting your view is a real transaction with a real price, then your unprotected view was never something you owned. It was something you were borrowing for free from a neighbor who hadn't gotten around to monetizing it. Buildings that sit on protected sightlines across from a park, on a landmarked block facing water with no buildable land between, hold their premiums for decades. Buildings that sit on a merely current view give that premium back on somebody else's construction schedule. So where does the money in this business actually go? Because somebody is making it. The developer is making it, and the penthouse is the instrument. Here's how a tower gets priced. The sponsor doesn't price 200 apartments individually. They set a price ladder, a base price per square foot for the lower floors, a floor premium of roughly 0.5% to 1% per floor as you rise, and then a top. The top is the penthouse, and that top number is chosen to anchor everything beneath it. When a buyer on floor 38 sees the penthouse asking $2,190 a square foot, the $1,600 they're being asked for feels like a discount inside the same building. It isn't a discount. It's the ladder working. The penthouse is the pricing argument for the other 200 units. And that's why sponsors do something that looks strange from the outside. They hold the penthouse. They market it. They photograph it. They put it on the front of the brochure, and they are frequently in no hurry to sell it because an unsold penthouse with a high ask keeps the ladder intact. Sell it at a discount early, and you have just published a comparable that lowers the ceiling on everything below. Which means when the penthouse finally trades, it often trades in a soft moment at a real discount to a buyer who has correctly identified that the sponsor's construction loan has a maturity date. Now flip it around to the position you're in as the owner. The sponsor still has 40 unsold units in your building. The market softens. Their lender wants the loan retired. So the sponsor starts cutting, quietly at first, a concession here, common charges paid for 2 years there, then real price reductions on floors 20 through 45. Every one of those cuts is a closed sale in the public record, in your building, with your amenities, with your doorman, on your elevator bank. Those are the comparables your resale gets priced against. The person whose pricing decisions determine what your apartment is worth is a developer whose interests ran opposite to yours the moment you closed. This is not theory. The Manhattan supertall wave of 2014 and 2015 produced a well-documented pattern of units reselling below their original purchase prices at buildings that had been the most expensive addresses in the country when they launched. One unit at $157, purchased for just over $30 million in 2014, changed hands about 5 years later for roughly $28 million, before brokerage commissions, before transfer taxes, and before 5 years of carrying costs on an apartment at that price level. Add those back, and the real loss is a multiple of the headline. That's a building at the very top of the market, sold to buyers with the best advice money can buy. Here's the other thing the price ladder hides: the rent doesn't climb with it. Take your $9.2 million penthouse into the rental market. In a strong city, it rents for $30,000 a month. That's $360,000 a year of gross rent, about 3.9% of the purchase price. Take out the $156,000 in common charges, the $70,000 in taxes, insurance, management, and a realistic vacancy assumption for a unit with a buyer pool that thin, and you're netting somewhere near $95,000. Just over 1% on $9.2 million. Now run the two-bedroom on floor 30. It cost $1.2 million. It rents for $6,500 a month, $78,000 a year. Common charges and taxes run about $32,000 combined. Net is roughly $46,000, about 3.8%. The cheap apartment produces almost 4 times the yield of the expensive one, in the same building, with the same staff behind the same front door. That gap is the whole story of the penthouse. Rent is paid for utility, and utility is roughly linear. A person needs a bedroom, a bathroom, a kitchen, a commute. Price at the top is paid for scarcity and status, and those are not linear at all. Somewhere above the middle of the stack, price detaches from what the space can actually earn, and from that point up, you are no longer holding an income asset with a nice view. You're holding a consumption good that happens to be recorded on a deed. That's fine, as long as you know that's the trade. The trouble starts when you priced it as an investment and financed it as one. So how does a penthouse actually die? Not in a crash. It dies in sequence, and the sequence takes about 5 years. Year 1, the reserve study lands and the building discovers the facade and the elevators are due in the same window. Year 2, the board approves a special assessment, and your 2.1% of a $14 million program is $294,000, payable over 18 months. Your loss assessment insurance coverage, the rider that's supposed to handle exactly this, caps out at $50,000 because that's what those riders do. Year 3, the assessment plus the pending capital work shows up on the lender questionnaire. Conventional financing dries up for the smaller units. Sales in your building slow to a stop, except for cash buyers hunting exactly this situation. Year 4, you decide to sell. Your broker prices it at $9.5 million because that's the story of the last decade. 6 months, no offers above 8. You reduce. 12 months in, you're at $8.4 million, and the serious buyer has read the board minutes, priced the remaining capital work, and comes in at $7.6 million. Trophy units at this level routinely sit 18 to 30 months and close 15 to 25% below the original ask, because the buyer pool for a 9-figure adjacent apartment in a specific building with a specific board is not a market. It's a list of names, and it's short. Year 5, you close at $7.7 million. Take out roughly 6% in commission and transfer taxes, and you net about $7.2 million on a $9.2 million purchase, having spent $1.3 million on carry and $294,000 on the assessment along the way. Nothing in that story requires a recession. The market can be flat, the building can be beautiful, the sequence runs on its own. So where is the version of this that works? It's the same asset, bought with 3 different questions asked first. The first is about the neighbor's dirt, not yours. Before the view premium is worth anything, somebody has to establish that it can't be built out. A park, a landmarked block, water with no buildable land in between, or air rights the building already bought. That's a title and zoning question, answerable in a week, and it separates a durable premium from a borrowed one. The second is about the building's age relative to its systems. A 12-year-old tower has spent nothing and owes everything. A 40-year-old building that has already replaced the facade, the elevators, the risers, and the roof, and has the reserves to prove it, is carrying a smaller future liability than the shiny one, even though it shows worse on a tour. The tour rewards the new building. The reserve study rewards the old one. The third is about what percentage of the purchase price is scarcity and what percentage is space. The buyers who do well at the top of a building are the ones who paid a modest premium for genuinely rare features and a normal price for the square footage, not the ones who paid a trophy multiple on every foot because the word penthouse was in the listing. And the buyers who do best of all treat the whole thing honestly. As the most expensive consumption purchase available in residential real estate, funded from capital they have already made somewhere else, with the carry budgeted for 20 years and the exit assumed to be a discount. That version works. It just isn't an investment, and it was never described to you as anything else by anyone who wasn't being paid on the transaction. Every buyer who walks that apartment spends the tour looking out the window. The ones who make money spend it reading the reserve study. Nobody is making any more top floors. Nobody is making any more people who have to buy yours either.